Today marks the 1 year mark of talking to myself in self-dialogue. Yay, celebrate! And I didn't even call it self-dialogue when I started self-dialogue. I just started talking to myself. And I feel like this next year could be about self-embodiment and not just self-dialogue. Though through self-dialogue I was able to embody certain things. Getting to California, coming off medications, and I feel this will be more of an embodiment because that energy will perhaps create a certain embodiment that's different from embodying someone attempting to get out of this forced embodiment of being in that other paradigm. I don't even want to say the words anymore. You know what I'm talking about. So this self-embodiment includes self-dialogue, but it's a little bit of something more. And it could be something more because the energy can move freely through this body and express itself. So the expression will be different when it's no longer expressing through those things that I was taking, and so it's a completely different expression. It could be something totally new. And when I was in my first map consciousness state of multi-dimensional intelligence and getting the download and the blueprint of my life, I connected with different things that didn't include the journey that I was then thrust into after. So I'm wondering if this will sort of put me back on that trajectory of over 6 years ago. And it's still the same trajectory, but it's different. And things aren't linear anyway, so it's just about a different level of consciousness. And through time, even going through that old paradigm that I was a part of, it still helped me slowly to embody this, especially through this process of self-dialogue this last year. So I really don't know what I'm going to talk about this year or speak as this energy that's not impeded by chemicals. I've talked about healing and altruism and lifestyle design, and I really don't know what it's going to be about. Because with how I was talking to myself before, I wanted my life to be about coming off those chemicals and going to California. So now that those things have happened, it's sort of freed up for more degrees of possibility and freedom. And it's really about embodying magic. And I don't know if I will watch old videos. Maybe I don't have time to. I thought that I might watch a video from a year ago and then talk about that, but maybe I'll just watch some randomly. Just keep the randomness going. And I have a bit of a headache from the air conditioning, and it's either that or my brain is just really growing. And this energy has brought a lot into awareness today, and the fingers have typed things into the computer and translated it into words, and it's on the computer screen, and now I'm going to look at it and translate it into video. It's just translating this energy of meaning into a different medium. So this next year is about perhaps this energy creating anything that it wants to create, and it will create it with a clear nervous system instead of a nervous system impeded by the mental health system. So this is about the human nervous system. And I've heard people say that we have to have a strong relationship with ourselves. And that's sort of a nice idea, but we don't actually go about a process of creating a strong relationship with ourselves. So there's a difference between saying, I have a strong relationship with myself and I've created a strong relationship with myself. And I feel through this process, I just realized today that I've created a really strong relationship with myself. And in this way, it doesn't really matter that I'm just talking to myself. It doesn't matter if I talk to myself or giving voice to some of these things to create relationship with oneself, because when we're not able to communicate with ourselves and with other people who are just ourselves in a different form, then we have this dialogue going on in our head, which is trying to work things out, but we're not actually working things out by seeing, we're just ruminating. And one can lead one's life by creating one's life, which is a process of actually sabotaging the old self, because there's this creative element that's creating something new, and so that old construct can't touch that new creation. This process, I feel like, has helped me create myself, not just talk about myself, but talk myself into creation, into being, into a new being. And we tend to talk about ourselves, but we don't talk to create ourselves. So I'm not just talking to myself, I'm actually creating myself. And I feel like this happens when we are no longer seeking for something beyond ourselves, but we actually create ourselves. So we create the beyond of ourselves and move into that, and we're moving in a different process instead of using our energy to create thoughts, which is like a pseudo creation, and it fools us into thinking that we're living, and we're only thinking we're living because we're thinking. We're not creating our life. And I feel like that's what map consciousness gets us in touch with, that we really have to create our lives, or we fall into the trap of other people's creations. So the creations of all the systems that would swallow us up if we aren't able to create our lives. Whether it's even just the system of employment, working in a boring job 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's a system that we fall into if we're not creating ourselves. And I'm saying this, and I haven't yet really created myself yet, but I'm seeing that I really do need to create myself, and I got a sense of that 6 years ago in my first experience. That was the download, that was the blueprint, and it's still not the ultimate, because the creation can still be very new, and living it is different than just getting the blueprint and sort of trying to build whatever it is that blueprint shows all by oneself, and that's pretty difficult. So this takes a certain intensity, and I feel like that intensity is that energy that we get in touch with that is moving us to create our lives. So can I move to create my life before the energy comes in and kind of makes me have to do that? And in a way, this creation is random decontravisions, and I talked about that term I made up before, and it's random. It's not completely random. There's an intelligence behind it, but it's removing the contrivances from the nervous system so it can flow with life and actually create one's life with life. And I feel like I am the evidence-based practice. This practice of creating one's own embodiment is the evidence, because one is living the life one is creating, and that's the evidence. So if I'm creating my life through this self-dialogue process and embodiment process, and I'm able to live the life I'm creating, then that's the evidence. And I practice with the evidence I see for myself, what is evident for me. And I feel like one can lead by just creating one's life, and maybe that gesturetically shows others that too, not how to, just that energy. And I didn't say this in the beginning of the video because I made a bunch of notes and then they get out of order, and then I don't know what I want to say first, and it doesn't really matter because it's not linear, it's not logical, it's creational. And I wanted to say that this is my 317th video that I made in this 1 year period from June 20th, 2016 to June 20th, 2017. And I talked about counting doesn't count, it's what counts that can't necessarily be counted. So there might be something in these 317 videos that counts, that can't even be counted. I have 317 videos, big deal. Anyone can make 317 videos of themselves picking their nose in 317 different ways. So that's not what matters, is the 317. But does this make a difference? Does this really matter? And it matters to me because I see that it affects my matter. It affects my DNA. My voice changes my DNA. It changes my matter. It changes my vibration. And the more I build this relationship with myself, the more I'm able to create myself. And because we don't really have this relationship with ourselves for real, we have this pseudo relationship with ourselves in our head that creates two selves inside. It's like a split, because we're not actually meeting our other self, which is the totality, which is the rest of the universe that is just as much ourself as we are ourself. We just have a separate body from that so we can actually experience ourself, and there's some kind of contrast there. Otherwise, we wouldn't experience, but it's just as much ourselves as our body is. But since we're not actually in touch with that, we create this dialogue in our head. And it's not even a dialogue, it's sort of a monologue. It's this repetitious thing. So I feel like speaking to myself on video is the same as speaking to others, because others are also myself. So this is not just about this going on the inside, but out loud on the outside too. And bringing this outside actually makes it more manifest. It puts it into the other self, which is the totality, and allows for a different reflection back. So I'm not really speaking so people will listen or anything like that. I'm speaking to create myself. And maybe that's something people will listen to. I really don't know. And I've just put it in those terms today. I'm speaking to create myself. And I wouldn't have come to that if I didn't just speak to myself and build this relationship with myself. And listening to myself might just be enough. And I feel like I need to create myself to a point where I'm beyond the influence of the perceptions of others. And I wonder if I've spoken enough words to release my real voice. The last year has been a voice of sort of desperation in a way, desperate to get out of this system that wants to keep me on chemicals. And that chemical process changes my voice. It changes what I talk about. It changes what I think about. I'm thinking about wanting to be rid of that, and now I'm at a point where I am, and I don't know for how long. So I feel like now that I'm back in this energy that is creative, continuing to be creative, and maybe being creative while still being in that paradigm has given me that creative energy, or moving with creation, to actually move into creation in a way that's not so jarring. And I've said that along the way by saying, be how you would be in that state of magic, which is called something else a lot of times. Do it anyway, even if you don't feel that energy. And in a way, talking to myself, I've been doing that anyway without feeling that energy. So I've been doing it so much that that's in my nervous system. So if now that energy is more animating me now because it's not being suppressed by those chemicals, it's already embodied in my nervous system. And I've talked about that different ways in terms of kind gestures and things, but I never thought about it in terms of the actual process of this self-dialogue and how this energy might want to have a dialogue of some kind. But now by doing this process of self-dialogue, the energy that comes in can now move through this organism, this being, in a dialogical way, because I've been doing that, but for the purpose of getting beyond the system, and then that's embodied in the nervous system, and then that energy comes in, and it's just a different dialogue, but the nervous system is already prepared for dialogue. So I'm just seeing this now, and it's kind of interesting. And I feel like my real voice wants to sing, and my real body wants to dance, though I'm not a dancer. So I wonder if the universe will bring those energies through when the body's not being warped and tense, and will this intensity break that tension that prevents the movements. It's the contrived energy, and this intensity can break that through random decontravisions. And part of that is going out and doing certain things to decontrive oneself. And it's not even about decontriving oneself, it's actually just about creating oneself, and that removes the contrivances, because there's this movement of creation, which creation is something new, so it's removing the old by virtue of bringing in the new, which is more intense than abiding in the old, the energy level of thought and habit and moving around on automatic pilot. So yeah, my real voice wants to sing and not speak about that which is designed to take our voices away. And it's not just about our voices to speak out against what is happening to us and what we don't agree with, but our actual voice of what we would be living as if we were never warped in that trajectory. So in a way, this is evolution of our voice. This life energy is the evolution of our voice, and what it would say and what it would create is to create. And it seems like we spend so much time talking to ourselves inside our head that we don't know how to communicate with ourselves and each other. And this is the part that is important to me, because just one of the parts, there's probably a zillion parts, but not using this energy and transforming it into speaking out against the mental health system. I've already done that for a year, but now that I'm out of it, is that what this energy wants to do? I don't know, maybe. But maybe since I already did it by talking to myself for a year, I don't need to continue with that. Perhaps. And because before I was ever labeled, that energy wasn't wanting to speak out against that system. It didn't even know about that system. So now that I'm out of that system, that energy could speak out against that system, or it could just go back to what it was originally trying to create and do, and leave that whole thing behind. There's other things to work on too. It's not about just going out and having fun. There's lots of work to do. And I saw that Sean Blackwell released a video, and it's about Dr. David Lukoff's journey through spiritual crisis, and he was able to get through it without being translated into a mental patient. And so he's been outspoken as a psychologist for many years, trying to convince the mental health system that some of these things that are called illness are actually spiritual crisis. And oops, I said the I word. I want to call it multidimensional intelligence, MI, instead of MI for you know what. So the point of what I'm saying is, if we as people who get in touch with this energy didn't have to spend it getting translated into you know what, or if we're able to escape that, spend it trying to convince the system that it's not an illness. It just looks like an illness to the one who looks at it. So I'll get to that after. But anyways, if we didn't have to then take that energy and turn it back and start talking to the system and saying, it's not that, it's not that, it's not that, what would that energy do? What would we create? What if we didn't have to abide in that energy and put it towards trying to convince a system that may never see? And I don't know, I'm just wondering about this. So for example, if I go into an extreme state of map consciousness and I get the download blueprint for my life that I'm going to be able to create song lyrics and write for musicians, and this life is magical and I'm going to help homeless people, and I need to create this dream center, and I'm connected more with homelessness and helping women and all the issues that that are there by virtue of being born a female. And there's a lot of issues too, but one has to focus on something or put some kind of direction to the energy. And I don't know about that, but what I'm trying to say is, if I went back to that original blueprint after being in the energy, seeing that original blueprint, 6 years in the mental health system, then out the other side, well, out the other side, I might be tempted to be convincing the mental health system that it's not this illness thing. Or I could just go back to the original blueprint and just create what I felt so passionate to create, and not use that energy and passion to be passionate against the system, but be passionate to use that energy to create that vision and that dream that I had. Not react against the nightmare that I went through because it was misinterpreted. And not just by the system, by myself too. I didn't understand what was happening, and I still don't, and I never will. That's just part of it. So I don't want to try to convince anyone by my words. And going back to that original download, that original blueprint, I haven't yet created myself as that blueprint. I'm still just almost reborn to getting back in touch with that blueprint and creating from that blueprint. But it's not a waste of time. This whole process of going through the system has been very helpful. But the point is, I haven't created myself as that vision of myself and what I wanted to create. And I'm not separate from this creation that I saw. That is me. That whole thing is me. So I can only convince myself by creating myself, by creating that vision, not try to convince this whole system of structure and people and science about, oh, it's not that. It's just going back to what I saw that it was originally, and forget about all this part. The learning is still there, but forget that part, because there was that original blueprint and creation, and go back to that and create from that. Not, I got through the other side and now I'm going to react to this part. They don't know any better, and I don't know when they will. And I don't want to waste this energy trying to convince a whole system of that. And perhaps this next year, if I wait another year, will just be the convincing to myself that this blueprint had something to it. It was actually my entire blueprint. They talk about how before you're born you have this blueprint of what you want to create. Well, maybe we get it halfway through our life sometimes, because before you're born and now is the same thing. There's no real time. It's an unfoldment of that original creation. And if we really forget and get off the path, maybe that original creation comes in and says, hey, you remember what you were here to do when you were born? You were here to sing. You were here to help homeless people, etc. And only by kind of talking myself into it and convincing myself will I move towards that. And part of that isn't trying to convince myself. It's actually because I forget. Every day I forget. It's kind of like that movie 50 First Dates, where she gets up the next day and has to watch a video of herself. And then when she does, she's like, oh, okay, that's who I am. And she can relax and just live her life for the day. It's kind of like that. And by doing this and watching the videos, it's like, okay, that's who I was today. That's who I was today. And I don't know who I'll be tomorrow, but let's see who I am tomorrow, and building on that little by little. So by saying goodbye to this chunk, I can be more with that original blueprint, which was more about homelessness and this dream center thing, and just wanting to be an artist version of myself. And I don't want to make this video too long. I have a lot more to talk about, so I will likely just do another one.